Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro described as a historical stain on El Salvador the criminal acts of the Salvadoran president against Venezuela. Brazil's Attorney General's office filed a request to convict former President Jair Bolsonaro and 7 other defendants for attempting a coup d'etat in 2023. And in Sudan, paramilitary fighters from Sudan's Rapid Support Forces killed almost 300 civilians in a wave of assaults on villages in North Kordofan state that began on Saturday. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro described as a historical stain on El Salvador the criminal acts of the Salvadoran president against Venezuelan citizens. The Venezuelan head of state pointed out that the more than 250 Venezuelan nationals who are being held hostage in the Secot in El Salvador have been denied the right to lawyers and visits. He also pointed out that Bukele is a figure widely questioned in the world for his human rights violations and for the fraudulent way in which he became president of his country. In this sense, the Attorney General of the Republic, Tarek William Saab, reaffirmed Venezuela's position against the kidnapping of Venezuelans disguised as deportation by the United States and El Salvador, who in addition to violating human rights, also violate international rights of these migrants who have not been proven to have committed any crime and have been isolated from their families.
Nayib Bukele, in the brief history of El Salvador, has no way of holding up. Really, he has completed serial human rights violations against the Salvadoran people. Now he has thrown on himself the kidnapping and forced disappearance of 252 Venezuelans, without the right to a trial, to a judge, to a defense, without the right to lawyers, to family visits, without the right to anything. The conditions in which they are inside that concentration camp are only comparable to the conditions in which the Jews were kept in the Nazi concentration camps. So Bukele, he himself threw a historical stain on himself that he will not overcome in centuries, the name Bukele and him as a person.
On Monday, Brazil's Attorney General's office filed a request to convict former President Jair Bolsonaro and 7 other defendants for attempting a coup d'etat in 2023. In a 517-page briefing presented by Attorney General Paulo Conet before the Supreme Federal Court Justice Alexandre Moraes, conviction is asked for Bolsonaro and the other defendants for the crimes of armed criminal organization, attempted violent abolition of democratic rule of law, coup d'etat, among others. The document is part of the prosecution's closing arguments, the last phase before the trial, which is expected to take place in September. The maximum penalties for these crimes exceed 30 years in prison. The move evidences the failure of the White House's pressure strategy continues to fail, contrary to the expected effect. And Brazilian President Luis Inácio da Silva signed a decree on Monday authorizing the country to take reciprocal measures in response to the 50% tariff announced by Donald Trump on Brazilian products. The decree implements the so-called reciprocity law, approved by Congress in May, and allows Brazil to adopt diplomatic and trade countermeasures if negotiations to avoid the U.S. tariff fail. The law prioritizes diplomatic resolution but empowers the government to impose proportionate restrictions if no agreement is reached. Brazilian officials have begun consultations with exporters to assess the economic impact and define a response strategy. The United States is Brazil's second largest trading partner, and this dispute raises the prospect of a potential trade war between the countries. And in Bolivia, the government and the Supreme Electoral Tribunal rejected threats from followers of former President Evo Morales, who announced that if their leader is not qualified as candidate, there will be no election. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, with the details.
Former President Evo Morales, in an assembly with his leaders in the Chapo region, insisted that without his candidacy for the presidency, there will be no elections next August.
No hay democracia. Vamos a ver.
There is no democracy. We are going to see if the elections are held on August 17. If we are not on the lists, there are no elections. We are not afraid. They will see.
No tenemos ningún miedo. Ahí van a ver.
La señora Ruth Nina ofreció la sigla de su partido para
Ruth Nina offered her party's acronym for Morales to participate in the elections, but the Electoral Tribunal annulled that party for not exceeding 3% support in the last elections.
Hemos decidido que el 17 de agosto
We have decided that on August 17 we prefer to give our lives before allowing them to come and force us to elect their right-wing candidates.
a sus candidatos a la derecha. Y ese día, hermanos, el Tribunal Electoral y el
On that day, brothers, the Electoral Tribunal and the government, instead of counting votes, will count the dead. That is what will happen if they attack our indigenous communities, if they force us to want to vote for them.
si nos obligan a querer votar por aquellos.
El Ministerio de Gobierno advirtió que esas
The Ministry of Government warned that these threats constitute a crime and requested that other institutions, such as the Public Prosecutor's Office and the Judiciary, join in prosecuting MRs. Nina.
Nuestro compromiso como gobierno nacional.
Our commitment as national government, as Ministry of Government, and as Bolivian police is to safeguard the entire electoral process in our country. Evidently, there is a competition of crimes from these statements that have been issued from public incitement to commit a crime through electoral crimes and ending in the crime of terrorism.
Pasando por delitos electorales y terminando en el delito de terrorismo.
El Tribunal Supremo Electoral también anunció acciones.
The Supreme Electoral Court also announced actions to stop threats against the imminent national elections.
El Tribunal Supremo Electoral no va a permitir.
The Supreme Electoral Court will not allow any citizen to actually threaten the democratic right of the more than 7,500,000 citizens who are eligible to vote. Tomorrow, we will have the full court to make this determination, and we will announce the determinations made by the full court. However, we must be categorical. This has been a public expression, and we understand that the authorities called by law have to act immediately in this regard.
En realidad, las acciones que determine como sala plena.
Participan 9 frentes en las elecciones de agosto.
9 fronts are participating in the August elections. 6 represent the right and 3 represent the left, made up of an equal number of factions of the socialist movement. That of former President Morales is a 4th faction of the movement for socialism that is fighting to participate in the elections. Polls show that the right wing has a clear chance of winning.
Tiene opciones claras de ganar. Freddy Morales, teleSUR, Bolivia.
Now for a short break coming up, remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English. You'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We're going to be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Heavy rain swept across the U.S. Northeast on Monday night, triggering flash flooding in parts of New York and New Jersey that stranded vehicles, closed subway lines, which led to declare a state of emergency. Flash flood watches and warnings were issued for sections of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and nearby areas as slow-moving storms brought rainfall rates of up to 7.6 centimeters per hour, with some flooding reaching depth of around 1.5 meters inside homes. Officials advised people to stay indoors and avoid unnecessary travel as emergency responders dealt with flooded roads, delayed transportation, and stranded buses, particularly in places west of the Hudson River in New Jersey. The National Weather Service highlighted the risk of repeated rounds of heavy downpours over already saturated areas, raising the danger of significant and sudden urban flooding. Indonesian rescue teams are searching for 11 people still missing after a boat carrying 18 passengers capsized in rough seas near the Mentawai Islands off the coast of West Sumatra on Monday. The The vessel was traveling between the towns of Sikakap and Tuapachat when it encountered bad weather and overturned around 11 a.m. local time. So far, 7 people have been rescued, including several local government officials who were among the passengers. Authorities have deployed 2 rescue boats and dozens of personnel to aid in the search, which is being hampered by challenging sea conditions. The latest accident follows a deadly ferry sinking earlier this month near Bali that left 18 dead and 17 missing. The emergency regime imposed in El Salvador by President Nayib Bukele has cost the lives of 427 people deprived of liberty, but this figure is actually an undercount, as the death could be more than 1,000. This has been assured by the non-governmental organization Socorro Jurídico, whose investigation also showed that 94% of these people did not have the profile of gang members. The data come from the victims' own relatives and have also shown that none of the deceased had been tried or convicted. That is, they died without knowing what they were accused of. The situation is extremely worrying since, according to official data, the regime of President Bukele keeps in prison about 88,000 citizens, which represents almost 2% of the population, not counting the kidnapped foreigners. And in Peru, an amnesty law that favors police and military personnel has been approved by Congress and is ready to be enacted by the government of that country. More details in the report of our colleague Ramiro Angolo.
En segunda votación, el Congreso aprobó una ley.
In a second vote, Congress approved a law that amnesties police and military officers who perpetrated crimes against humanity, a fact that has been strongly questioned.
The justifications and reasons for approving such an unconstitutional, illegal, and unjust law are truly nauseating. In the face of a Congress that continues to legislate to benefit some groups such as the military police, human rights violators, or criminal mafias against the rights of the victims' families.
Esta ley afecta cerca de 150 sentencias.
This law affects about 150 sentences in 600 judicial proceedings that took place between 1980 and 2000, during the internal armed conflict.
¿Hay una regresión de los derechos humanos en el Perú?
There is a regression of human rights in Peru. There is an attack on human rights organizations and on those of us who defend, promote, and work for their fulfillment, for their exercise.
Porque se ejerzan. En nuestro país estamos viviendo.
In our country, we are living in a context of not only permanent political crisis, but also permanent attacks from a narrative that delegitimizes the work of human rights organizations.
Ataques desde una narrativa que deslegitima el trabajo.
But also ignores the existence of human rights and intends rather to go for a selective justice path.
Y se pretende más bien ir por una vía de justicia selectiva.
Quienes la promueven defienden a los perpetradores.
Those promoting it defend the perpetrators by saying that they had no way of knowing that they were killing civilians, which has provoked outrage.
Aquí no se trata de que si la víctima era o no inocente, aquí se trata de que las fuerzas del orden.
This is not about whether or not the victim was innocent. It is about the fact that the forces of law and order have the obligation to guarantee the life and stability of every person, and if they detain a person in the commission of a crime or if they detain him or her, he or she is brought to justice to be judged and punished. But in no way can it be accepted that they killed children because they thought they were terrorists, a 2-month-old child. A 2-year-old child, that is incredible, that does not justify what Mr. Rospigliosi and all those in Congress are doing.
Lo que el señor Rospigliosi y todos los del Congreso están haciendo.
Debido a la desconfianza que hay en el Tribunal
Due to the lack of confidence in the Constitutional Court, the lawyers of the victims announced that they will inform the Prosecutor's Office and the judiciary so that the judges do not apply this law.
Un ejecutivo que no tiene ninguna.
We have an executive that has no responsibility for human rights in general. A Minister of Justice who has not been able to speak out against this proposal, so they will surely approve it, and what is most worrying is that this is a trial balloon to give amnesty for crimes from 1980 to 2000.
Dar amnistía a los crímenes del 80 al 2000.
But then they will generate other amnesties for the investigations that are taking place for the deaths caused by this government between December 2022 and January 2023.
Entre diciembre del 2022 y enero del 2025.
Sin esperanza en el gobierno, Los afectados seguirán
Without hope in the
luchando.
government, those affected will continue to fight in national and international courts to repeal this law of
Para
impunity.
derogar esta ley de impunidad. Desde Lima para Telesur, Ramiro Angulo Maquiavelo.
We have our second and final short break coming up. Before we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English, there you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage, and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date with the world's most recent events. Final short break, and go away. Welcome back. In Sudan, paramilitary fighters from the Rapid Support Forces killed almost 300 civilians in a wave of assaults on villages in North Kordofan state that began on Saturday. According to the Sudanese legal advocacy group Emergency Lawyers, at least 200 people were shot or burned to death in Shak al-Nom, while 38 others were killed in surrounding settlements. Another attack on Sunday in Hilat Hamid killed another 46 people, while 48 people were killed and 37 injured in other villages. International human rights organizations are already accusing the RSF of war crimes and crimes against humanity in a civil war that has raged since April 2023. This conflict has created what the United Nations calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with more than half of Sudan's 48 million people facing acute hunger and recurrent disease outbreaks. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated on Monday his call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, warning that the humanitarian crisis has reached dire dimensions.
But what we are witnessing in Gaza is a level of death and destruction that has no parallel in recent times. And it is something that undermines undermines the most basic conditions of human dignity for the population of Gaza, independently of the enormous suffering that they are having. We absolutely need a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And I hope that the parties are able to overcome, both parties are able to overcome the difficulties that they still find for that ceasefire to take place. But the ceasefire is not enough. It is essential that that ceasefire leads to a solution, and that solution can only be possible if both Palestinians and Israelis can have a state where they can exercise their rights. The idea, and that is why we are going to have in July one conference on the two-state solution, the ideal that it would be possible to have 5 million people inside the country, in their own land, without any rights, is something that is totally against humanity and totally against international law.
And social sectors in Colombia finalized preparations to receive the Hague Summit in Bogota, whose main objective is to address the allegations of war crimes and genocide carried out by Israel against the Palestinian people. Our colleague Hernan Tobar with the report.
Organizaciones sociales y de
National and international social and human rights organizations are developing a broad agenda of activities within the framework of the Hague Conference being held in the Colombian capital, which will be attended by the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestine, Francesca Albanese. From this space, attendees denounced the repercussions of the genocide carried out by Israel.
Realmente se mira que Colombia ha tomado
It really looks like Colombia has taken a world leadership position against fascism, and in particular against this damn genocide. That is why we come from the United Nations, because this is really where the action is. This is where it is really going to start taking the necessary measures that have not been taken so far, to take multilateral action to finally end this horrible genocide. All of that from this stage, as the organization.
Terminar por fin con este horrible genocidio.
Los participantes dieron a conocer que el próximo 16 de julio
The participants announced that on July 16 they will carry out cultural activities as well as mobilizations and sit-ins in solidarity with Palestine and in rejection of the Palestinian extermination promoted by international Zionists. They will also accompany Francesca Albanese, United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestine, who will participate in the conference promoted by President Petro and the government of South Africa. The meeting will also serve to denounce the international companies that finance the Israeli government and army.
Primero el tema del carbón, está Drummond y está Glencore.
First, the issue of coal. There is Drummond and Glencore. This is important. We mentioned the BIT systems in Colombia, for example, Nitofim, which is one of the companies mentioned in Francesca Albanese's report that is here in Colombia. Another agrotoxics company, Adama, is here in Colombia, and then there is a company that is in Medellin, which is in the Medellin metro, CAF, and we are carrying out a boycott campaign at a global level, because CAF operates in occupied Palestinian territories. CAF is in the Medellin subway, and we are demanding that the contracts be cancelled.
Y estamos exigiendo que se cancelen los contratos.
Para la comunidad palestina en Colombia y los movimientos.
For the Palestinian community in Colombia and the support movements in the country, it is hoped that the Hague Summit will serve to take concrete actions against Israel and that the request for humanitarian aid will be accepted.
She has condemned and declared the genocide against the Palestinian people because she represents the International Human Rights Council and denounced the genocidal acts of Israel against the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank because there is a policy of extermination that wants to wipe out the roots of the Palestinian people from their land. Israel has used all methods as it has been a laboratory for experimenting weapons of mass destruction against the Palestinian people.
Which is an international crime.
El encuentro del Grupo de la Haya liderado por Colombia.
The meeting of the Hague Group, led by Colombia and South Africa as co-chair, has as its main objective to address the increasing allegations of war crimes and genocide against the Palestinian people in the context of the illegal Israeli occupation.
Hernán Darío Tobar Gaitán, TeleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
The World Health Organization and UNICEF said that more than 14 million children did not receive a single vaccine last year. In their annual estimate of global immunization coverage released Tuesday, the organizations acknowledged that millions of children around the world are at increasing risk of contracting serious diseases and dying due to declining childhood immunization rates. The figures released show that more than 30 million children worldwide are not fully immunized against measles, mumps, and rubella, and that 14.3 million children have not received a single routine childhood immunization. The UN experts say that access to vaccines remains deeply unequal and that conflicts and humanitarian crises are rapidly undoing the progress made, acknowledging that the collapse of international aid this year will make it more difficult to reduce the number of unprotected children. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.